We, the self-assembled group of veterans from various nations, answer the call and appeal to all currently serving and retired members of the ADF to also remember their oath and assemble beside us in peaceful protest alongside the good people of this country in a united front against tyranny.
The police are motivated by fear. They fear the people, and they are fighting the people using fear and intimidation tactics. Now, instead of sending social workers and people to help those communities who are affected by the lockdowns, they're sending police and army, and they're driven by fear, and they're in fear of the people. After September 11, Australia, just like many other Western countries, increased its counter-terrorism budgets and its intelligence budgets to unprecedented levels. They were given, billions of dollars all of a sudden. Now, of course, there are no terrorists in Australia. And what we see now is all of these resources, all of this funding, all of these new powers and unprecedented police powers that were given under the pretext of fighting against terrorists. All of these powers, resources and funding are now being used against ordinary Aussie citizens, against ordinary Australians, against mums and dads, against construction workers, against people who are just on the brink of suicide. The people are protesting not because they want to protest, it's because they're crying out for help. And instead of helping them, instead of talking, mediating with them and trying to mitigate the circumstances, the government, they're sending police, they're shooting people with rubber bullets, pepper spraying them, choking them, detaining them, and this is just what we see on video. Now imagine how many times this has happened where the people haven't been as fortunate, to get this on video. It's very alarming. And you can definitely say that there is a huge anti-government sentiment all around the country, and people that would never ever think of criticising police in normal peaceful times are suddenly in a position where they're speaking up and they're speaking out, they're rising up, and they're rising to defend their rights, because we all know that if we don't do something now, history will judge all of us, and we want to end up on the right side of history. Now, I personally am convinced that the people now who are fighting for freedom, even though they're copping pepper spray, even though they're being threatened and intimidated by police and being sent to jail, that the time will come when these people will be remembered as Australian heroes. The support from the international community for the Australian people is really appreciated. Our friends and our allies in the Commonwealth and in America and in Europe and all around the world who are standing with the Australian people, speaking out. It's very important you guys do that, and ramp the pressure up if you can. I'm sending a Mayday call, an SOS call. Ramp the pressure up. The Australian people are under attack. The Australian people are suffering under a dictatorship. We have to name it a dictatorship. Enough's enough. We have to start, calling a spade a spade. Now, what the Australian government is doing is, if you had a checklist to tick all the boxes, censorship, yes. Police powers, yes. Police state, yes. Banning protests, yes. Harassing citizens, yes. Arresting citizens, yes. Using force against citizens, yes. Using military against citizens, yes. So they've ticked all the check boxes.
No cop? Yeah.
Got me? All good?
Not yet, mate. Before, when you pulled over, I know we'd ask if you pull you forward to put your mask on.
I said I don't need
medical
to.
exemption, but then you didn't speak to us any further and you drove off, mate. So what
I wasn't detained, was I?
Your exemption, please.
Was I detained?
Huh? I wasn't detaining you. No, I was asking.
Well, I drove off because I wasn't detained.
I was asking you for your medical exemption.
So now you're detaining me.
So now you need to show me your medical exemption, okay?
Knock yourself out.
Thank you.
They say beat the cops at their own game.
Oh, he does.
Look at these cops.
Okay.
Welcome to the police state.
Don't play games with us, mate.
I think you're playing
So
games.
you want to change?
I think you're wasting police
change your opinion, mate,
resources.
instead of
You're
trying
wasting
to,
police resources. Mate,
Okay, that's all
you're
doing.
inciting.
Thank you. Have a good day, sir.
There you go. That's how you win. That's how you win, ladies and gentlemen.
It's quite surreal when there are military helicopters circling, the residential areas. We know that a lot of police are actually against this. There are some police that take pleasure in this, and there are police that open fire on protesters using, high-powered rifles with rubber bullets. There's a lot of police intimidation, harassment, police assaults, there are police acting unlawfully, and the police minister in New South Wales, David Elliott, he's gone on the TV and he makes fun of his citizens by calling them half-wits and wolfheads and clowns, and it's complete disrespect to the people. The suicide rate is extremely high. There are more people dying from suicide than from COVID because the people have just had enough. Australians are very laid back usually. They'd much rather have a shrimp on the barbie and have a beer and relax on the couch than go to a protest and become activists. But now you see the everyday Aussie, they're being drafted into this civilian defence movement, this resistance movement. And it's even people, it's not only about people who are not vaccinated, it's even those who are vaccinated, because many of those who are vaccinated, they were forced into it. They were forced into it because they would lose their jobs, they would lose their livelihood. And even though the Honourable Prime Minister Scott Morrison promised there would be no mandatory vaccinations, that's a lie, because they're doing everything they can to dangle the carrot in front of the donkey, to force people, to trick people, to coerce people, to blackmail people. This could be a big experiment to see how far people can be pushed. That's why anyone who is considered a ringleader or a protest leader, or anyone who speaks out on the media, anyone who calls up a radio station and tries to speak out against the government in any capacity is shut down. Now, protest organisers are arrested even before protests occur. It's like the conspiracy to commit protest against the government, and it goes against everything that this country stood for. And this is a historical low in the history of Australia. And we see the Eureka flag being brought back, and the Eureka flag is a flag that the Australian miners in the 1800s used when they had a rebellion against the government. And there's a lot of anti-government sentiment now. There's huge anti-police sentiment, and people are unifying amongst each other. I think in the next election, if we have an election, going at this rate, I wouldn't be surprised if elections are banned. But if elections are allowed, the major parties will lose, definitely will lose, and we'll see a rise in independent parties, in minor parties. Australia is a very laid-back country in terms of the citizens not putting up a struggle, not putting up a fight. There's a saying in Australia, she'll be right. And she'll be right is, basically slang for, it's all good, we're not going to put up a fight, you could say. And that's the she'll be right attitude is obviously, that's a key component of being an Aussie. But now they're using that, they're targeting that's a weakness, really. We never expected as Aussie people to be coerced and tricked and attacked by our own government. So a lot of Aussies, they've trusted their government, and this is what's happened. Now, what's most concerning is the government is giving itself powers, police powers. There is no parliamentary process. Parliament's closed. There is the police hotline to report police corruption and police harassment and intimidation and illegal police behaviour is actually closed. Now, you can dial it on air. If you dial the number, they'll say, thank you for calling, the police hotline, whatever. And it's closed because of coronavirus. So at the time in history where we need the government most, where we need protection, where we need the unions. And there's another thing I want to talk about. The unions have sold out the people. They're killing off all small business. They're giving small business some peanuts just to make sure they don't revolt. The government's handing out money. But the way the Australian government is handing out money at the moment, it's almost as though they know that in a few years the money's not going to mean anything, or they don't intend to pay it back. They're paying people $750 a week to just stay home and do nothing, and this is quite a lot of money. Yes, they're training us to become weak, and of course by limiting people from having physical exercise, by limiting people visiting friends and family and communicating with each other, they're actually weakening people's immune system. They're weakening people's mental health. So what's important to know here, COVID hasn't actually hit Australia yet. We've got isolated cases. There are some regions and towns where there's no COVID, but there's lockdown. Tweed Heads, no COVID, there's lockdown. Cairns, one case, lockdown. New Zealand, our neighbours, one case, they send the whole country into lockdown. So COVID hasn't hit. Now, when COVID hits, that's when it's going to get very interesting. Now, by that stage, obviously, the people will be so weak and that the government intends to weaken us. But in fact, quite the opposite is happening. The people are awakening. The people are rising up. There are actually government employees. Police are walking off the job. Firemen, firefighters, are actually joining protests. You know, there are army and defense personnel who have already said they will refuse to shoot at their own people. They will refuse to comply with orders that are against their own population. And this is very encouraging. And finally, we're seeing even the politicians are speaking up. And in the beginning, they were all quiet. Now we're seeing the tide turn. I think it's going to be a mad scramble for people to end up on the right side of history, because we intend in Australia to have Nuremberg 2. When I say Nuremberg 2, I mean we're going to bring everybody to account. If we manage to win, if the people manage to, you know, take back their rights, take back Australia, stand up for themselves, we're going to hold everyone accountable. We're going to hold Health Minister of New South Wales, Brad Hazzard, to account. We're going to hold Police Minister David Elliott to account. We're going to hold everyone to account that was involved in the intimidation and harassment of Australian citizens. And all the people, the thousands and thousands that have committed suicide, their blood is on the state minister's hands. They were driven to suicide. In fact, it's actually a crime to drive somebody to suicide, and the government is guilty of that. And my heart goes out to all the families who have suffered, and the mental health factor. The real pandemic is the fear, the mental health, and the intimidation. We see that in Australia, in the Australian political system. The Liberal and Labor Party, who are the two major parties who hold roughly about 80% of the votes, they have been compliant and complacent. The majority of the senators and the MPs, members of parliament, have been silent, and they've sold out their people. Now, all of the smaller parties, we've got parties like, Clive Palmer, Rod Cullen, Liberal Democratic Party, we've got Pauline Hanson. All these smaller minor parties and micro parties, in fact, are actually going to see a surge in support and a surge in popularity coming up to the next election. So, look, the Australian political landscape will certainly change. The Aussies are rising up. They are getting off the couch. Australians have been, pushed to wits' end. They're facing the question of either we win